neighboring Djibouti. This is called the Combined Joint Task Force, Horn of Africa. It consists of about 1,700 personnel, including some non-American personnel. It was set up in 2002 for the purpose of monitoring the issue of terrorism throughout the region, including Yemen. The Horn of Africa has now expanded its activities to Uganda, Tanzania, and the Comoro Islands. It actually has not been operating in Somalia. It has been operating all around Somalia, but not in Somalia. It's focused more on the collection of intelligence and trying to break up any terrorist plots if it comes across any, but it's also been engaged in a lot of sort of public relations kind of activity, building water wells in schools and rural. One time in the Ogaden area of Ethiopia, it's not permitted in there now. It's doing more of that in Kenya and Tanzania today, also Uganda and Djibouti. But it has a counterterrorism mandate primarily, and it's branched out from that a bit. It's under the control now of this new AFRICOM organization based in Stuttgart, Germany. It used to be based under the Central Command, but all of that has changed very rapidly. The question was raised as to why I suggested that the international community should not dictate the political process in Somalia. I think it should not dictate the process for the following reasons. One, it tried to dictate the process in the past, and I was at one time part of that, particularly during the UNITAF and the UNISOM operation. It frankly botched it. It botched it for several reasons. The international community does not have an adequate understanding of the situation on the ground in Somalia. As a result, it makes some very bad decisions because it doesn't understand the situation. And I don't think it will ever understand the situation properly. And when you say international community, you're talking about all these different actors out there that have cross-cutting ideas and thoughts and theories and philosophies. The Italians want to do one thing, and the Americans another, and the Russians another, and it just goes on and on and on, and trying to get them all together to come up with something. You come up with the lowest common denominator, which is usually a disaster. There's certainly a role for the international community. It has to be supportive of the process, but it should not dictate the political process. That sort of ties into the issue raised by the former ambassador of Kenya to the United Nations. I would certainly agree that the African Union, IGAD, and the United Nations all have very important roles to play, but none of them should be dictating the process. I was intrigued, for example, with a very forward-leaning statement that IGAD, the Intergovernmental Authority of Development based in Djibouti, of which Somalia is a member, and it met on the 20th of May in Addis Ababa. And it came out with some sort of very tough measures, which, from my optic, are probably good. One was to put a lot of pressure on Eritrea for ending arms deliveries to the Shabab organization or Hezbollah alone. Now, Eritrea is a member of the IGAD, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, but it's sort of suspended its participation. It was not present at this meeting in Addis Ababa. All of the other member countries were there, and presumably all of them agreed with this resolution. But that kind of action by, in this case, IGAD can be useful, just as what the AU has done in terms of keeping the port open and the airport open and protecting the presidency is useful. But there is a point at which the Somalis have got to do this for themselves, or it is no longer credible. If the Somalis feel they have to rely upon outsiders to do this for them, it will never become a viable state again, in my view.
Yes, the volume of the pledges to Somalia vis-à-vis pledges to other countries in recent times is true that the volume is still very little, but one should understand that this is the start of hopefully what will escalate in the coming future, provided, of course, that the Somali government itself and the Somali people show the fruits of this assistance or support from the pledges from the international community. I believe that then you can, if you show results, then you can also ask for more assistance. The role of the regional organizations, I think, has been already mentioned, is to help and assist the transitional federal government and the Somalis to help themselves to stand on their feet. If international community and the African Union would help now in this phase of need, then the Somalis can help themselves. And that is ultimately, that is the only viable solution, is that the Somalis help themselves.
Thank you. I'll take the question regarding what may appear to be reluctance in countries being forthcoming in foreign exploration. Perhaps just to say that before AMISOM, Burundi was actually the first experience, the first real experience of the African Union in peacekeeping. And the point I'm trying to make is that it is a notion which is emerging in the continent. And it also requires specific standards to be met for countries to contribute troops. Essentially because it is a new concept in the AU, we are following UN standards for peacekeeping, which means that troops have to, countries have to meet certain standards for them even to contribute troops to a mission. So it's a process which is developing, and one can understand that certain countries would face certain difficulties in trying even to meet the standards. And the second point is that now the countries may well commit to contribute troops, but resource mobilization for them to deploy is another big problem, which up to now depends on bilateral negotiations between the countries concerned and their partners and other donors in the international community. So it is, I believe, for a country to come forward to contribute troops, they also have to do the job of determining how those troops will be supported. Because it is not enough to pledge troops, you also have to determine how you will deploy those troops, how you will train them to meet the standards of the UN in peacekeeping. Because as I said, our own concept is still emerging, and that is going to be within the context of the African standby force. So countries face a lot of challenges in, I believe, in making the decision whether to contribute to a mission or not, because they have to deal with all of these issues before they can arrive at that decision. And thirdly, of course, there is the issue of even the capacity of countries, given the limited sizes even of their own peacekeeping organizations. For a country to make that kind of decision, they also have to consider the needs, their own immediate needs, to commit into the long process of them determining to contribute troops, going out to shop for funds to support those troops, because the African Union does not have its own resources to support deployment of troops committed by member states at this point in time. The whole issue of mobilizing resources to support AU peacekeeping operations, as you know, is an issue which has even been brought to the UN, and the panel led by Romano Prodi was put together. It did its work, and the report has been submitted to the UN, and the process is still beginning on how to determine concrete modalities for sustainable resources to fund peacekeeping operations supported by regional organizations. So I think there are so many challenges that countries face in making this decision, and perhaps Burundi, I would also imagine that having also benefited from a peacekeeping operation, one would feel the moral obligation to be forthcoming, because also in the process of benefiting from that peacekeeping experience, they also got training and perhaps also got to understand how it is concretely done. So there are so many factors that come into play when a country is considering whether it should commit troops to a peacekeeping operation. And again, just to mention, after